So this is the shot. You know, there's no light, there's no bounce, just this window right here blowing out behind the subject. And this is the same shot after I graded it. So, you know, all these has been done within DaVinci Resolve tools. There's no paid plugins. There's nothing paid here. It's just DaVinci Resolve version. So yeah, I just want to show you how I would go about this and grade this clip right here. Now, you can see the note tree right here, but we'll make it from 0 just so you can actually see it. So let me duplicate this clip, okay? And we'll go here and we'll reset all the grades, right? So we'll start from the ground up. Now, just want to preface this by saying, you know, this is just the camera, right? There's nothing else. We did use a black pro mist filter in front of the camera lens, and we were shooting, I believe, we mixed with 20mm 1.8 Sony and a 35mm 1.8, right? We actually bought a 20mm 1.8 secondhand, so we're just testing it out. So this was like a not planned shoot, and we just went into it without any lighting and just got, you know, you'll see even the table is messy, so don't mind that. So the way I would start with this is, honestly, I usually go and just use one of these two PowerGrades that I got ready. You know, I can either look through this one and know if I want more of a Kodak look or I want more of a Fuji look. And, you know, just for the sake of this video, I think I'll go more for the Fuji, and I think I like those greens in the shadows. So I'll start with this. Now, you know, these actual PowerGrades are free. You can download them in the description, and they'll just save you like those 5 minutes of building all that notes tree structure, and you know, they'll just get you started. So I already have a really good base, right, to start with this. And what this PowerGrade gives me is, you'll see it gives me a quick color space transform here at the beginning, another one here, right? So what these two do is, if you go into the effects, you know, you just go and select the camera you've been shooting with. You know, because we shot in an A7 IV and we used Sony S-Gamma 3 Cine and Sony S-Log 3, we just input those. Then we output into DaVinci Wide Gamma and Intermediate. And of course, you'll see we're going to be working in this color space throughout all these basic corrections. Then we have to output it again. So we go from DaVinci Wide Gamma and Intermediate into Rec. 709 Gamma 2.4. Now you'll see that right here, we just add a little bit of the Fuji or Kodak look, and we add some texture at the end. But this is where the big thing happens, right? So yeah, let's start with it. So usually I'll just reset exposure, white balance. I'll reset contrast, and I'll deactivate saturation even. So, you know, this is the log and this is the Rec. 709, right? So the big thing here is we already got the print stack. The print stack is just a grouped notes, so 2 group notes actually, and you know, it's another CST. You can just pretty much see we're inputting from the Rec. 709 and Gamma 2.4 we were coming from, and outputting to Rec. 709 Cine on film lock. We just do this because we then want to implement whether it is the Kodak or the Fuji. Actually, this is not renamed correctly, so my bad on this one, but you know, this is pretty much what we do. And this really allows us to exit this compound node, and you know, we can go here and decrease the intensity, but we're not really affecting the Rec. 709 conversion, if that makes sense. So this is why we're keeping it like this. Again, this is pretty much, you know, the Rec. 709, then we apply the print stack, the Fuji, right? Now let's get into the rest of corrections. I really like to have my waveform open, and I'll just get some basic adjustments here, right? Like exposure, white balance, contrast, and saturation. So let's start with exposure, and I always use HDR wheels. I just feel like they work really nicely with me, to me at least. And you know, I know other people just use, you know, the offset in the primaries. I just like using the HDR wheels. So I'll go into the global, and I'll always keep a look at, you know, the waveform. But honestly, what I'll try to do is try to balance the image out as much as I can and get it to the mood that I would really like it, right? So I'll bring it down slightly. You know, usually the issue you might encounter in these kind of lighting situations, also exposing with your camera in that situation, is you either expose for the window, so you have everything is silhouette, but you're, you know, kind of keeping all the detail in the windows, or you expose for the subject so you can clearly see the subject, but you're blowing everything out. Now, my approach is usually more that, I try to balance it out and I try to find a nice spot where I can see the subject, but I'm not blowing out the window so much that it's just, it just looks amateur and you cannot even see that, okay? So I typically try to go somewhere in between. So in this case, I'll just lower everything down. And another thing I really like doing here is because I'm in the HDR wheels, I will usually go to the specular. You can see what it is affecting. I'll lower it down ever so slightly, and I'll do the same with the highlights, right? So I'll lower it down as well. And this is a quick exposure before and after. Now I'll quickly hop into the actual white balance. Now with this, I might, just deactivate the print stack sometimes so I can actually see, where the image comes from, and it's not really affected by, the actual print stack or the shift in tones. So I'll get into the white balance, and usually here, I just really like using the qualifier tool, okay? So you see, I also take a look at the vector scope, and what I'll do is with the qualifier tool, I can really hover it through or onto the skin, and you can already see it's giving me a little circle right here under the vector scope, and it really helps me understand, whether the skin tones are going onto the green side or the magenta side. So I'll try to align it with this line, and I can already see how it probably needs a little bit more blue because I know it's already quite warm and it needs a little bit more magenta. So just by doing this, I already corrected so much and the image feels way more balanced, I would say. So yeah, I can already activate the print stack once more, and you can see how this is quite blue right now, but we'll take a look into that later and I'll show you how we can do this. But anyway, I'll also go into the contrast. Maybe what I will do is go into the waveform, probably bring those down just a touch more because I know when I apply the print stack, this will go up again. So this is why I'm always kind of balancing back and forth between the print stack and the rest of the tools, okay? I also know I want to lift this one up ever so slightly. Actually, I might apply the print stack once more so I can see what's going on in terms of contrast. And then I'll go back here and I'll try to separate it ever so slightly. So I'll lift this part up. So, it's creating kind of a point here in the skin you can see. And then those highlights, and I'll bring those down just a touch to keep that contrast alive. This is the before, this is the after. I might tweak this a little bit because I might want something like this. Yeah, that feels quite good to me. And, we might also want to play around with saturation. So I will activate this node. It's not doing too much right now because I've got set it pretty low. So I'll increase it right now. But this saturation is not regular saturation slider. It is actually set to, if you right click on it, you'll see the color space is set to HSV. That is hue, saturation, and value. And I really like using this technique because then if you deactivate channels 1 and 3, you're deactivating hue and value, you're just left with saturation. So when you go into the primary wheels, you can use lift, gamma, and gain to add or subtract saturation and, shadows, midtones, and highlights. And I just love this technique because, I typically just go and add, saturation in the highlights. You can see it's not adding it everywhere, but it's giving that density vibe in the skin tones, okay? So you can just see this, right? This is pretty much where we're standing. I might even lower it ever so slightly, or depending on the time, I might just, increase it ever so slightly, and then I decrease the midtones. So I'm kind of balancing everything out. And honestly, I'm quite enjoying this muted tone, so I won't do too much, honestly. I think saturation-wise, we're all right here. I think I'll just keep it at this. And then what I was telling you about, right? The white balance, I think we did quite a good job here. But then if you wanted to shift the tone a little bit, now that you know that the white balance is all right, you can always enter back into the print stack. And when you get into the Fuji film, you just right click it. You may go into the LUTs, film looks, and you might be using one of those 3 default Fujifilm film prints that are going on into DaVinci. And you got the D60, the D55, and D65. These are just the white balance options. So you might choose any of them. So in this case, I got the D60, but if you wanted more blue kind of tone, you could go into the D65, right? You can see how this changes. Or just in case you wanted warmer, you could go into the D55. Honestly, I'm gonna say I quite enjoyed this look, so I might just keep it for the sake of this one, and let's go with it. And then honestly, it's just about texture and adding a few different things, right? So in this case, you know, I always like to start with some film grain, you know, so I'll just go into the effect and I'll just look for the film grain effect and I'll just pop it here. You know, you got many different presets. The one I usually like to use is 35mm 200T. And honestly, I'll just go way up because otherwise I don't see what I'm working with. So I'll just add it, and you know, you might like this effect, so it's amazing if you enjoy it like this. To me, it's a bit overkill, but I just like to see what I'm working with. So I'll keep it at this. You know, usually I'll go into advanced controls, I'll zoom into the skin, and I'll just lower the midtones until a point where it doesn't feel like, you know, it's graying all over the skin, but I'm keeping it in the shadows and highlights. So you can see already the difference it's making before and after. And honestly, last thing I might do is just blend it down a touch. Maybe I'll go something between 50 and 80, honestly. So I'll just keep it at this. I think that's good to me. This is the after, this is the before. Now, once that is done, I'll honestly think about adding some halation maybe. We'll see how this works. So this is pretty much the effect, right? It's already too much. You can see it's getting those red outlines in the highlights. So I just want to tune it down so much. So first of all, I might decrease the threshold so it spreads out even better. And honestly, I just don't usually touch any of this unless I want to get rid of, you know, that red glow and that red saturation. In that case, I might decrease saturation or the strength. But anyway, I generally like where it is. So I'll just go deactivate and activate, see what it's doing, and I'll just really blend it down by so much, like to 0, and I'll just keep blending it in until I start noticing it, and that to me feels like good enough, right? I just want to add a little bit of it, honestly, and you can see already at the tip of the microphone and at the tip of the, you know, the glasses, I can already start seeing those things, but I'm not really breaking the skin, which I want to protect. Okay, so that's it for halation, and honestly, I might add a couple more, honestly. So texture 3, I might do a power window. Okay, I might do a power window, and what I really like to use is some vignetting and just, you know, make the eye stay focused on the subject, as I would say. So I will get into the window. I usually, you know, just use a circle, and I will go something like this. I will follow the shape of the subject and where I want to focus the, you know, attention. I'll go Shift H so I can see what the mask looks like, and I'll feather it out by so much, the farthest I can, so it's very well spread out and it's not like hard lines showing, right? So I'll just center it right there. I know he's not going to be moving so much, so throughout the whole clip, you know, we're going to be staying in the same spot. So to me, that feels good. And then I'll just click on Shift H again. I can get rid of, you know, this highlight. And then I will usually go into the HDR wheels and I will go into the shadows. I'll lift them up ever so slightly to lift up, you know, some light on the subject. So now this is kind of the difference we're making. You can actually notice, not too much. Maybe I'll tune it down just ever so slightly, because otherwise it's just too noticeable. And what I will do is reduce the contrast a little bit as well, so it's not that digital and hard. And I might reduce the shadows again just a bit more. So yeah, something like this to me is already good enough. It's just adding a little bit of level onto that. But then I'll click on Alt O, or you can just right click, go into Add Node Outside, okay? And honestly, you just want to go onto this, and this, what is effectively doing is it's creating the same power window we had in this node, but it's gonna affect on the outside. So, I'm just gonna go to the HDR wheels in this, and I'm gonna lower the exposure. So as you can see, we're effectively creating a vignette. Of course, this is way too much. So what I'll just do is lower it just a touch. Maybe it even went too far. So something like this to me is already great. And last note that I might do, honestly, I'm thinking about split toning a bit. Okay, split tone. And I might go into the primaries and I'll just play with lift and gain, honestly. I always really like using, blues in the shadows, warms in the highlights, because it's also a quite warm shot. So this is what I will do. I will usually start with, the shadows. So I'll add blue into the shadows. You can already see what this is doing, right? I'll try not to go too much where, even the hair and the blacks feel like, they're tinted in blue. And then I will add and compensate, with adding warm into the highlight. So I don't want to go really green. I want to go more golden, something like this. So let me reset this and see where I'm going. And I maybe got too much blue, so I'll get rid of it. And this was the before of the split tone, and this is after. This is just adding a little bit of more color separation, as you can see. And yeah, I think this is the final shot, honestly. You can take a look at this. This is the after. This was the before in log. This is pretty much the result. I honestly genuinely love this look in this office, in this space. It feels quite natural, I think. And that's pretty much it. Last thing for me would be to go into clips and really for the rest of the sequence, just apply the same thing. See if it works. You see, this works completely fine. If you wanted more level into the shot, I just go into exposure, boom, lift it up ever so slightly. Let's try with this one, which honestly to me feels pretty good already. So again, if I wanted a bit more level, I just go in it. Maybe you want more contrast to even create further separation. So hell yeah, you can get into it, right? And same thing here. Maybe you want to try it in this one. Honestly, I love how muted it looks. Yeah, this to me is insane, but maybe you want some more level, and that's completely fine. So again, we can lift it up. Again, add a tiny bit more contrast. Here we can play around with more contrast because honestly, we don't see the window. So we're already keeping those nice in there. And yeah, this is pretty much it, guys. You saw the windows, how blown out they were. So, this is pretty much what I would go and do. And yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Remember that if you want to save yourself like those 5 minutes of building the node tree from scratch, you got a free download down below about the PowerGrade. You can just get them in, you select the camera, and you call it a day. So hopefully you enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.